Can everyone see the map? Hello?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, all right, perfect. So this is the map without the numbers on it. This is the map that had the letters on it. The reason we started with letters is because we wanted every part of this process to be fair, up to and including selecting of the ward numbers, because if you had an odd number, you would only be elected for 2 years, but if you had an even number, you would be elected for 4 years. So we didn't want to assign numbers on at the beginning of it, given an unfair advantage or seeming like we were favoring one group or one person or one elected official over another or neighborhood over another. So we started out with letters, and then we had the infamous coin toss to select the final numbers that the wards would be numbered. In working through this redistricting, we have various different state things that we have to adhere to, but also federal guidelines, like making sure that the map does not violate the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that we do not engage in gerrymandering and all of these other things, and also leaving room along the way for communities of interest. So in our case, in the case of the city of St. Louis, what we heard loud and clear from residents all over the city of St. Louis, that our main community of interest would be neighborhoods, and they wanted to keep neighborhoods intact as much as possible. And as I shared with Michael and others, from the onset, when I, as a mathematician and thinking through it, when you think about, the shapes of the neighborhoods and, and how some are very dense and some aren't dense, aren't that dense at all. I didn't have a lot of faith that we would be able to achieve, what we were ultimately able to achieve in terms of keeping as many neighborhoods intact as possible. I thought we would have to break the borders of a lot more neighborhoods than we ultimately had to break. We ended up having well over 80% of the neighborhoods intact wholly. The handful that we weren't able to keep intact, we were able to set it up so that they were split, as at most between 2 alder people. So you will not see any neighborhoods where you have 4 or 5 alder people that would be serving that neighborhood, right? What I'm showing here, this map is a polarity map that shows the demographics and by color code where people preside and clusters of people preside in the city. And I'm going to turn off the parks layer so we don't misinterpret that. So on the right hand side, if everyone can see over here where it says map layers, the plurality, so the lighter green all the way to the darker green is Asian population, lighter pink or mauve all the way to the darker pink is African American. The darker it is, the more dense the population is, Hawaiian, American Indian, Hispanic, non-Hispanic, and so on and so forth, right? So when you look at the map and where people preside in the city of St. Louis, you can see the density of populations, and you can see, like, for example, in here, I'll zoom in here to give you a good idea. In this area here, over in the West End, there's a high cluster of Hispanic population. Then you see a cluster here in the middle of this dense African American population, and so on and so forth. So part of what we worked on was in terms of making sure we did not walk headlong into gerrymandering, was to make sure that we followed the same methodology all across the city. where we adhered to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, where we weren't, breaking populations apart or unfairly clustering massive populations as to affect the total number of elected representatives that minority group could have before the legislative branch. And just to make sure that we're operating on the same page, let me dive into gerrymandering real quick. So there are two terms under gerrymandering that's important when you're working on redistricting. One of them is cracking, and the other one is stacking, and some people call it packing, right? What cracking is, for example, you see this high cluster of African-American population when we look in North St. Louis, north of Del Mar. If we went in and broke all of that population up, especially when you get down toward the borders, where we would break all this population up and water it down so that then we would decrease the amount of minority preference wards by breaking that population up, opposed to letting it be the natural clusters that exist within the communities today, then that would be gerrymandering, and that would be cracking, because we broke them up and eliminated minority preference wards for the sake of skewing the number of minority elected, the number of seats the minority group could influence before that for that branch of government. And packing and stacking is just the opposite of that. So that right now, of the 14 wards, we have 7 minority preference wards, 7 non-minority preference wards. But if we clustered them in much larger clusters, so that we eliminated minority seats, so that you would have, instead of 7 and 7, we would have 5 and 9 or something like that, right? That would be gerrymandering, because we would have unfairly clustered them and changed our methodology to assure that we decrease the number of minority population before that legislative branch. We have, and when you look through here, this ward here, this H ward, is a minority preference ward. And the reason I call it a minority preference ward instead of just an African-American preference ward or Hispanic preference ward is because when you look at the highest clusters of Hispanic population, right, down through this area here is, where we begin to see a little more concentration, but you can see clearly by the polarity map that there isn't enough concentrated Hispanic population to create a Hispanic preference ward. Matter of fact, we actually tried to do one, and I'm going to, I'll bring it up here so that you can get an idea of what one would look like. This is just what's coming up. This is just one attempt at trying to cluster, together enough Hispanic population to create a Hispanic preference ward, and it's just you just don't have enough concentrated population to do it and to be a compact and continuous map. So this red piece that you see here, this is one ward. This would be one ward. And I don't have to tell you that that would not qualify as a compact ward, right? So it's very, 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 very difficult to do. We have not been able, I mean, just not enough concentrated population to pull it off. But what we were able to do was 12. I believe it is that. What we were able to do was within those wards like the F ward and L, was to be able to capture some of that population within those wards so that you have a nice concentrated overall minority preference ward. And, I'm really happy with the outcome of that. But again, just to kind of give you all an idea, again, yeah, so when you look down in this area here and down in this area here is when you begin to pick up some of that population. The other thing that was really important for us to achieve in this map is to have a map that's compact, right, and continuous. Those are two things that we have to meet on the federal side and also on the state side. And there are three main measurements of compactness that is generally used across the country, and that's Posby-Popper, REAC, and convex hull. Those are the three that are generally used by legislative branches, whether you're drawing maps on the federal side or the local municipality side like we are across the country. Now, I also would tell you there isn't an accepted measurement by the courts that's widely accepted across the country for a measurement of compactness. It's elusive, right? But what you want to do is to be as close to the ultimate level of compactness as possible. Each one of those measures of compactness, whether you're looking at Posby-Popper or convex hull, each of them operate and will give you different variances. If you look at the city of St. Louis, the shape that we begin with in the city of St. Louis, it has a level of compactness related to it in relationships to its population, right? And that level of compactness, right, that we begin to draw wards within, we want to assure that we do not expand beyond, far beyond what the level of compactness of our original shape, the city of St. Louis, that we started with. That's kind of a rough way that some scholars have begun to approach it when looking at compactness, right? But to give you another idea about compactness, so a perfectly compact object is a circle, right? Is a circle. No wards are going to be in circular fashion. Or no district boundaries are going to be perfect circles. If you look here, if you think about just the shapes of our neighborhoods, so you look at Botanical Heights, it goes here and then it comes out here at an angle, and they swoop around, and they, if you look at the shapes of the neighborhoods themselves weren't drawn to be perfectly compact shapes, right? But what you do is you say, okay, what's the total square footage within, or square miles or acreage within this circle? And then you take the length of the perimeter of that circle, and then you would do the same thing to, let's say we're looking at the compactness of Ward C. So Ward C, the landmass that's encompassed within Ward C, we would take that, and then based on the length of the line around Ward C, that line around Ward C will tell us if it's 10 times longer than the line the perimeter of the line around the circle, then it's probably not compact. One of the bigger challenges with the city of St. Louis, and other municipalities have this also, is that you have this big, long, arm or whatever that sticks out with very little population in it, right? But it's part of the city of St. Louis, so it has to be part of a ward. Well, you going into it, you know that ward, this ward here, would not be as compact as other wards. You can't just cut this leg off because it's part of the city. There's still not enough population within it to stay within the one person, one vote federal standard that we have to meet. So that population, this population has to be part of a population that's closest to it, which would be right in this area, which is what it is. Well, that impacts the compactness of that ward because you have this long, slender area that has little population in it, but it has to be part of a ward. All of our compactness scores were good, solid compactness scores. So, we were able to do this map and keep all of these wards really compact. Even in the case of this Ward B here, even though it has the long area through there, but the way we were able to consolidate some of the other areas, we were still able to keep it a nice, solidly compact ward that would be able to withstand a court challenge. Now, beyond that, working to make sure we have a map that would be able to help the city of St. Louis grow beyond just what it is today, right? One of the things that we thought, really heavily about it, I tell you, some of you all who spoke up about this when you did, myself and some others, we were just so happy to hear you say it, because it's part of what we were thinking about also, was how do we, through this map, address the issues of the Del Mar divide, right? And having served for as long as I've served, when you work with people and developers and stuff, and you say, well, why aren't you just want to develop in these areas, why don't you want to develop and work in some of the other areas? A lot of times it comes down to relationships. Well, I don't know that area, whatever, right? So part of being able to create a map that would help to usher on some of these new relationships and begin to get people to work across borders, neighborhoods and alike. And a lot of you probably haven't had an opportunity to look at a map with all the neighborhoods on it, but the neighborhood boundaries flow right down Del Mar. One side of Del Mar, there's a different neighborhood. It cuts off right at Del Mar and picks up on, and then another neighborhood picks up on the other side of Del Mar. Well, by creating a ward like this one, where you have, very, very dense population in North St. Louis, with the West End neighborhood, Visitation Park, Academy, and the like, and then you come over and pick up Skinker de Bolivar and de Bolivar Place and Forest Park, and having that be part of this North Central ward, it begins to help everybody included in it, because now there will be a sharing of resources across this divide, and almost a requirement to begin working together in different ways, opposed to the way it was set up before. So we tried to do some more of that. coming, you know, down central. It was a little more difficult in these areas, right? Because of the population changes, adhering to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and all the other things that we had to adhere to. Coming into downtown neighborhood was cut up between 4 different wards. Now we were able to put that in, split it just between the 2 wards, but do it in a way where we consolidated as much of the downtown population as possible into you know, one primary ward as the central point, and moving on from there. You know, the other ward that was, you know, I showed you the one up top with the long arm sticking out. The other area that drives the compactness score for the city of St. Louis as a whole, if you take all the wards out and just measure the compactness of the shape of the city of St. Louis. When you get down here, let me zoom out so you can get an idea here. You get down through these areas. Let me go one more. Get down through these areas, you see, you know, no population or anything in there. It's just like vacant landmass, and all of us know that's industrial area and so on and so forth there. And you have here, down through here, the railroad tracks and stuff. Well, when you look at Ward G, where it picks up a fair amount of the railroad tracks and some of those things, and then a lot of that vacant riverfront land, right? You know, that's another ward where it impacts its compactness score, but then compactness score is still a really good compactness score, on par. It's well within the standards that we want it to meet on the map. So it's a good solid ward also. The other thing that's important to note is the 1 person, 1 vote standard, where you want to keep the total you know, deviation between the highest number in terms of population and the lowest number in terms of population within a 10% deviation. So let's say that your highest number is, let's say our target is 20,100 people, right? And we draw a ward that's 6% above that. 6% above the 20,100 people. Well, on the bottom end, the smallest ward that we could draw would be a ward that's only 4% less than that number, because the total deviation between the top number and the bottom number, you want to keep that between that 10% deviation. We were able to keep ours well within that margin. So you know, I was really happy the way that worked out. But you know, one of the things I want to just thank everybody for, you know, we had so much community input. It was just amazing. And I made my way into politics by, you know, I was one of the people that would show up at meetings because they, you know, people just, in my estimation, they just weren't moving things the way, you know, I thought, and some of the neighbors thought. And then I ended up getting hooked in and running for office, and here I am. So it really made me feel good to see all of the passionate, you know, input that we received on the map. And, you know, quite frankly, it helped. It helped us to draw a better map, because along the way, people would draw, you know, if you listen closely, people would, a lot of times they would drop just that piece of information right before they finish. That would be a key piece of information that we could use in helping us refine the map. So that gives you a general overview, and I I can wait for any questions if you'd like, or I can continue to go.
I think we're gonna wait for questions until the end. And then right now we're just gonna move to Kathleen, and she's gonna give us an overview, and then yeah, we'll have both of you answer questions at the end.
Okay.
So next we have Kathleen Farrell. Kathleen is a unit leader for the League of Women Voters. She's the former chair of the communications department at SLU. And she currently represents Reform St. Louis, which is known as Prop R on the ballot, which seeks to create an independent commission to draw ward lines. And it also seeks to limit conflicts of interest on the Board of Aldermen. So Dr. Farrell is going to give us an overview of Prop R. She's going to give us some of the reasoning behind it and the policies and how they would affect the Board of Aldermen. Dr. Farrell, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I want to thank, can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I want to thank the Young Dems for setting up this important conversation on the future of our city, particularly for inviting a woman who is over 70 years old to participate. That really tickled me. I want to tell you the story of Prop R because I'm concerned with talking about the city's future tonight. I'm going to respond to some of President Reed's comments and then leave plenty of time for your questions. A group of engaged St. Louis organizations and individuals in 2020 asked their friends and neighbors this question: how can we help move our city forward at this critical crossroad? The answer to that question was to change the way the Board of Aldermen did business. And it was also the beginning of the Reform St. Louis movement. Currently, our laws allow alderpersons to engage in conflicts of interest that are illegal in other cities. Board of Aldermen members control the redistricting process that President Reed has just described, in which, in essence, they choose their own voters. And they can also overturn the will of the people to change the way we elect them. We knew, however, that it didn't have to be this way. And we formed a coalition of the community partners. And I was really glad to hear President Reed say how important public input is, because this is exactly what Proposition R is about. We consulted national experts. We asked the community what reform measures they cared about most. And we formulated a policy to take to the people through a ballot initiative and work to make sure it passed. We developed a set of principles to guide our work. We researched, we deliberated about, and wrote a policy. We consulted legal counsel all along the way, and we worked together in a collaborative and transparent manner. I tell you this part of the story because I think that process was important. And it also tells you that the public, the residents of this city, can indeed work together and get something done, including redistricting. Now, in the meantime, the Board of Aldermen, as required by law, was drawing a map. And President Reed has gone through a lengthy explanation of the considerations that were used to do that. I want to ask two questions. How did that go? Okay, what do we have at the end of it? And then most importantly, what is next? You probably know that, this group of people was also heavily involved in that process because we wanted to make the process that we were handed while we were waiting to pass new reforms the best go that we could. And President Reed has talked a lot about how important public input was. I want to point out that public input was pretty limited actually by the process. We had a very short timeline. People did not have access, neither the public nor alderpersons themselves, to the software that was used to draw these maps. We had limited public meetings in which questions could not be asked and answered. And we had accessibility obstacles to those in our community who were visually impaired, who did not have cameras, which meant they couldn't participate, and who really could not get access to the maps and the software to truly participate. Just think, if the public was this helpful with these limitations, what the process could have been. What the process could have been. President Reed has said a number of times that things were late in starting and that the timeline was tight because we didn't get the census numbers. That is true, we didn't get them, but we were well aware, at least 2 years before the census numbers came out, as to what the trends were developing to be. We knew we were losing population in North St. Louis. We knew the population was moving around. Just think if these involved and caring citizens had been able to start conversations earlier that year about what they really wanted in their city, what they wanted to work on in their communities, what they wanted in redistricting, what a good process this could have been. Just imagine if, instead of one software license to apply all the criteria which President Reed talked about, that the alderpersons could have had access to that, and certainly the public could have had access to that. We have a wonderful region which is rich and blessed with geospatial kinds of technology and special expertise. We certainly could have put it to work. What did we get at the end of it? And I could talk about other things. I could talk about the fact that I think I watched every single meeting on redistricting, from the legislation committee to the general board of aldermen to the public town halls, in which the public were allowed to give brief statements but not ask questions that were answered. But I can tell you that I was not able to observe the process by which these deliberations took place. Okay. For example, we were told in the legislation committee that alderpersons would be paired up north and south, and they would have important discussions about how the map would be drawn. Okay. I don't know if that was ever done. It certainly was not done in a transparent manner. And I know that a number of aldermen were very troubled about the lack of transparency and their inability to really get in and participate in the process. It's one thing to have private discussions. It's quite another to have a totally transparent and public process. But we want to talk about the future, and I want to talk to you about what comes next. I think that Prop R is a way that we can move our city forward. And there are 4 key points to that policy that I want to discuss. The first one is that it will prohibit alderpersons from taking official actions where they have a personal or financial conflict of interest relating to the legislation being considered. We want to make sure that the public knows if an alderperson has a conflict of interest by requiring that disclosure is easily accessible on the city's website, not on the Missouri Ethics Commission website, which is very difficult to navigate. We want it to be there. Now, many cities have this kind of conflict of interest policy. And I want to explain to you just a little bit about what that means. It means very simply this: alderpersons cannot take official acts to influence decisions that benefit them personally or financially, okay? And what does that mean? Who does that affect? It means that they can't vote or take an official action on a matter that benefits themselves or their children or their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren or their parents or their siblings or their nieces and nephews or their aunts and uncles. For example, they cannot vote on something that any of those people in their family circles are employees of, officers of, directors of, board members of, that they have business interest in, that they have a contract with, or even if they are serving on a board of a nonprofit. For example, what if your grandmother is sitting on a church board and that church board is asking for a city grant? Okay, should you recuse yourself if you're an alder person? Absolutely yes. This means that in terms of your own employment, that you shouldn't have any that has a city contract, that you certainly shouldn't be taking any kind of money for advice, and that you have to report on all employment. It simply means you can't vote on that specific bill. It doesn't mean you can't be an older person. And you can also ask for legal advice from the legal counsel of the Board of Aldermen itself. You've got to file your conflict of interest with the clerk of the Board of Aldermen and the legal counsel of the board. You can't lobby for 1 year after service. And I have to tell you my personal experience. I was the chair of the Conflict of Interest Committee at St. Louis University. And I have to tell you how important it is to have these kinds of protections in place. All of us think we're good people and that we'll do the right thing. But experience tells us across the board that we have to have these kinds of policies. States of Massachusetts and Vermont, for example, require it. And I think that that is really important. Now, I want to talk about redistricting because that's what President Reed spent most of his time on. And the second key part of the Reform St. Louis Prop R policy is that we create a public redistricting commission. And I was glad to hear, again, President Reed say how good the public was. Because now what we want to do is turn this entire process over to that public. How is it going to work? First of all, we're going to have an oversight committee. We're going to have 5 members, 1 from Urban and Planning Design Agency in the city, 1 from the Comptroller's Office, and 3 retired judges. Okay? Now, a lot of questions have been asked about judges, and so I want to answer them. These judges must apply for this job, have a certain amount of experience on the bench, and have to be from either the City of St. Louis Circuit, St. Louis County Circuit, the Missouri Supreme Court, or the Eastern Missouri District Court of Appeals. It's important to know that the Board of Alderpersons will pick those judges. They don't. And they could pick all of those judges from the City of St. Louis. They could pick them all from retired Supreme Court justices. They do that. How then are the commission members chosen, the members of the public? There's going to be an application process, which also includes that people disclose conflicts of interest, and we can't have a successful applicant who has these conflicts of interest. We must have at least 1 applicant from each ward in the city before anyone is picked. Those applications are sent to the Board of Aldermen, and this is really key. Any alderman can strike an applicant. Strikes would be made public. And then the refined list would be sent to the oversight committee after that process is done. Okay. One last word about that oversight group. If the Board of Aldermen can agree on those people, the Office of the Comptroller would take over that process and decide who that oversight commission would be. Now, what would happen then is that the oversight committee, and maybe it would be just like the drawing process that we had to choose the numbers in the Board of Aldermen, would draw 4 successful applicants, meaning that they had been vetted by the Board of Aldermen. They would choose 4 of them at random. And then those 4 members would sit down with that oversight committee and choose 5 more from that applicant pool, the one that had been vetted by the Board of Aldermen, because we're concerned about such things as equity, diversity reflecting the demographics of our city. And they would choose the remaining 5, which would give us 9, okay? Then the next time we have a census, and every time after that, this process would go into place and start to run. What work will they do? Okay, they will draw maps. There will be requirements for an entirely transparent system. The public will have 3 public meetings in all parts of the city. The public will have 30 days at least for written comments. The Board of Aldermen will come and give recommendations and comments because we know that they have expertise. But so does the public, and so does our community. And they will not redraw the map. Now, how do these work? Are we going to be a guinea pig? Are we the first city to start this? No, we aren't. Austin, San Diego, Minneapolis, Santa Fe, New Mexico have all done this. There's been a lot of analysis by the Brennan Center and others about how well these work. And they seem to be working very well with good oversight. And I think that what we would come up with are good maps created by committed citizens who would move our city into the future. Our third point of this policy is that it would prohibit the Board of Aldermen from changing an election system that elects municipal elected officials without the public's say so. For example, we passed Prop D, approval voting. Over 88,000 people voted to do it in the general election of November 2020. And last Friday, the Board of Aldermen introduced 2 bills that would, in essence, repeal approval voting, and the thing that those over 88,000 citizens said they wanted their city to have. If Prop R is passed, the Board of Aldermen can't do that. They have to go back to a vote of the people. If they believe that things should be changed, then they should go back to a vote of the people. And that is very important. That is very basic. We ought not to override the vote of the people. Now, the last piece of this policy, I hope that President Reed will agree with us, is a good thing. And that is that we want to remove all gendered language from the charter. We're not going to call people aldermen anymore. We want to call them alderpersons. And we think that this is an important move to reflect the values of our city and to reflect the fact that we are all equal. And that is really important. Now, what I want to do is, I've kept this slide up here for a while because I think it's important that you know who supports this proposition. And not only who supports it, but also who worked very hard to take all of the steps that I outlined for you when I began with the story of how Prop R began. The League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis, SLACO, Show Me Integrity, Missouri Faith Voices, Women's Voices Raised for Social Justice, Missouri Healthcare for All, the Young Dems that we're with tonight, us, the Jewish Community Relations Council, okay? SAM, Election Reformers Network, and a number of very thoughtful and committed individuals in our community. And you can see their names and faces there, okay? And you can read them. We accidentally cut out Rabbi Susan Folby, and I apologize for that. But these are some of the types of people who not only seriously support this, but also worked very hard and listen to one another in a respectful, transparent, and collaborative fashion to put Prop R together. Now, I want to leave plenty of time for your questions, and so I'm not going to use all of my time.
May I, Mr. President, may I respond to a couple of those things?
I think more likely than not, we have a few questions generally that one of the questions that we as a board have, I think will give you the opportunity a little bit to address at least a couple of the questions regarding things like community engagement and transparency within the process. So if it's all right with you, President Reed, we'll be sure to get to that question and give you a chance to speak to the process a little bit. But I want to make sure that the members have a good amount of time between now and the end of our meeting to ask both you and Kathleen questions that will hopefully give us some more insights generally into both of your ways of thinking about board reduction, redistricting, and kind of how that looks in the future of our city.
Okay.
All right. Thank you both again so much for your contributions to the meeting and for your presentations regarding this process, your involvement and experiences with it. As we move into the question section, I want to encourage folks who are here present and want to ask their question in person to go ahead and use the raise hand reaction if you have that available to you. My plan here is to bounce between folks who have their hands raised within the room, at which point you'll be asked to unmute and then you can ask your question in person. Please be sure to keep questions on topic and respectful with regards to our panelists. And additionally, anyone who has already asked a question of Vaughn in the chat, we'll go ahead and take one question from the audience directly, one question from the chat, move back and forth that way. And then our board has a couple of questions as well that we want to make sure that we have a chance to ask near the end before we kind of go into outro and a little bit of post-meeting housekeeping. So with that being said, if you have questions that you would like to ask of either of our panelists, please feel free to use that reaction to get your hand in the air. And Vaughn, if you have any questions from the chat that you would like to share at this point while other people collect their thoughts, that would be fantastic. If you want to lead on the first one there.
Yes, I have a question that was given to me. It says, please explain why wards 11 and 12 are so non-compact.
Wards 11, you said it wards 11 and 12. Let me see which ones you're referencing. If you're talking about the one ward with the long arm, I think I explained that. There's only really 2 wards in the entire map that aren't, you know, extremely compact. You know, I explained that one has the long arm attached to it, and that's just the shape of the city. There's nothing you can do about that but to cut that off, and you have to include it within the boundaries of the city. So.
All right, we have an audience member with their hand up. Carissa, you should be able to unmute now.
Thank you. I hope you will allow me the courtesy to remain off camera for my question. That is something that the citizens who spoke to the Board of Aldermen on redistricting were not given. So those of you who don't know me, I'm Carissa Gilman Hernandez. I actually served on the Young Dems E-Board in the past, and I'm the 15th Ward Committee woman, pronouns she, her, hers. President Reed, in September, you came to the Central Committee to talk to us about undoing Prop D and then your opposition to Prop R. So there was no information given about redistricting, your plans, how we could be involved, how we could get our neighbors involved, our ward orgs, anything like that. So when you're talking about the importance of public input, it just doesn't ring sincere to me. But my specific question is, why are you actively trying to overturn a proposition measure that passed with 68% of the vote? And are there other proposition measures that had supermajority support that you plan to undo in the near future?
Okay, first, thanks for the question. When I came to the Central Committee, the Central Committee invited me there to talk about Prop R. Prop R is what I discussed at the Central Committee. That was the subject matter they brought me there to discuss. I also talked to them about, talked to all of you all about redistricting, talked to you about the committee structure and things of that nature, things that were related directly to this Prop R. Alderwoman Sharon Tyus introduced the bills to change the Prop D. I think that they're very good bills. I think Prop D is a failed piece of legislation. It puts us in a place in the city of St. Louis as, lab rats when you look at electoral law and what election systems are supposed to adhere to. One of the first principles you want to adhere to when putting an election system in place is to first do no harm. And what that means is that if indeed the voter walks into the polling place and they follow 100% of what you've laid out in terms of them placing their vote, they will not do any harm to whatever their number one choice is. But by not having a weighted system where you just have, people can vote for 10 people and then hope that somehow it's figured out on the back end, that automatically flags it. So even if we did not change it, it would certainly lose if came up against a court challenge, because it does not have a provision in it that allows voters to weight their vote. If it had a weight on it, it would be a totally different system, but it does not have a weight on it. But then you look at some of the other stuff within Prop R. I know Kathleen talked about conflicts of interest, and she said that the Board of Aldermen are not required to disclose conflicts of interest. That is absolutely, completely, patently false. So what you have to do is you have to put a letter in with the clerk of the Board of Aldermen, working with the attorney of the Board of Aldermen, and you also have to disclose any conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest with the Missouri Ethics Commission. A few years ago, we expanded that beyond anything I know that exists in St. Louis County or any other municipality across the state of Missouri, where we now require all department heads to do the same. So we expanded it beyond just aldermen or elected officials. We expanded it to include all major department heads in the city of St. Louis. And
I think we should probably move on to the next question there, President Reed. But for just one quick point of clarity, are older people currently required to recuse themselves from votes upon which they have a conflict of interest?
100%, yes, they are. They're required to do it. And they can, and they when they take the oath and everything, we are required to do that today. And we're also required to disclose it and recuse ourselves from votes related to anyone, even family members that may benefit from that vote. We are required to do that.
Okay, I see that there are folks dropping links in the chat to information on Reform STL/Prop R right now. So be sure to keep your eyes on the chat as well, friends, if you're looking for additional information there. There's a good conversation going on. Vaughn, you have another question for membership to tackle from the text. Vaughn, are you with us? All right, we'll give Vaughn a second there. If anyone else has a question that they would like to ask in person, please feel free to go ahead and use that hand react to get involved that way. Oh, Vaughn, hello.
Sorry, Chris, I can ask the question. My apologies.
No, you're perfectly fine. Just want to make sure that you weren't having any technical issues there, friend.
Yeah, I was talking when muted. So this question reads, Dr. Farrell, having only 9 people on this committee doesn't seem like a lot. Does that mean there will no longer be a committee man or a committee woman job at all?
Yeah, the job of the committee men and women, and I assume you're talking about the Democratic Party, but it's also true of the Republican Party, is to increase voter participation, recruit people to the Democratic Party, register them to vote, give them information, et cetera, et cetera. The redistricting committee is to draw new maps. They're very different processes. And both are essential, but they have different jobs. So I hope that that clarifies that. We're talking about 2 very different kinds of things.
And to the question of, right quick, I
Chris.
just wanted to give Dr. Farrell the chance to answer the second part of the question, which just had to deal with the number of people involved. If you wanted to mention the rationale behind 9 in particular, or if not, also totally fine.
Well, you know, we did a lot of research with national think tanks on what the best way to do this was. We looked at the public commissions of other entities, including the cities that I mentioned, but there are also counties that are using this and some states that are using this. And we thought for the size of the city that 9, and that is what is recommended. If you get it much larger than that, it's unwieldy. Now, I hate to talk about the present Supreme Court, but you know, there are 9 members on the Supreme Court. And those 9 people also have access to the resources that they need.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Dr. Farrell. That response.
Kathleen is fine.
Okay, I always want to be sure that I'm being appropriately respectful
No,
when I'm speaking.
it's fine.
I didn't stay in academia that long, and I want to respect the fact that you did.
No, you know, I paid my dues and I learned a lot of time, but you know, I've spent a lot of time out there on the street too. I believe that that's important.
Appreciate it.
Chris, to jump in here, I think I can add some clarity, a little more clarity to that question. So part of what Prop R would do is to make it so that we cannot adjust the election system that was put in place also, that we spoke to a little bit earlier, which has made it a nonpartisan, made the elections nonpartisan in the city of St. Louis, which has taken all of the funding out of the party system that they would need to organize and to work within the community to help get out the vote and to help assure that the people that the party felt needed to be elected was elected on a state and national basis. So the committee people, their jobs would essentially be, you know, null and void, except for some other, you know, smaller items that they would deal with within the city of St. Louis. The other challenge is, and I've heard this from a lot of people in North St. Louis, is that when you look at the fact that within Prop R, they will allow judges from St. Louis County to be part of the panel. But when you look at North St. Louis, how many retired judges do you have living in North St. Louis or who have lived in North St. Louis, who aren't related to or has never worked on any campaign and doesn't know any other elected official? They don't exist. So
President
folks,
Reed, not to interrupt, but I do have a handful more people who actually have their hands up. And also, I'm terribly sorry. I just want to make sure that we are able to keep moving because while I didn't know how long the Q&A session would go, I'm very happy to see the level of engagement that we're seeing right now. Before we jump into the next question, right quick, there was a clarification, Dr. Farrell, that you wanted to add via the chat. I don't want to turn this is not a debate forum or a format. I want to make sure that it remains a panel in terms of the opportunity for our membership to drive the questions that are being asked. And hopefully in the next response that you give, you have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about that, Dr. Farrell and President Reed, if that's all right. I see a hand from former, I guess you're always president, aren't you, President Garth? Former president of the St. Louis Young Democrats. I'm going to go ahead and give you the opportunity to unmute yourself there, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President, Chris. And my question is for President Reed. Mr. President, you and other alderpersons have stated and stressed that ward reduction redistricting would have a negative impact upon the Black vote in this city. Could you explain how that is possible, given the maps and statistics that have been presented during the course of the meetings and everything? Because, of course, there are many people who may not know about the history of the Delmar divide and everything, but could you explain how that is possible given the current statistics and maps?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm not on record as saying that it would be it would impact the African American vote. You know, when we look at what we were able to do with this map, we were able to take what could have been a really bad situation and assure that there was some equity moving forward in the city as a whole, and that there was fair representation in the end across the city. Now, one of the things that I have talked about in the past was that this idea of ward reduction really was not a groundswell that grew up from the community. It was portrayed like that, but I was around when it began, and it started with the development community. And it was born out of the development community because every time they went to an alderman and said, I want to do this, that, and the other, the alderperson would say, first, let me go talk to my community, because the community would have an undue influence on that alderperson and could unelect them if indeed that alderperson supported a project or a development thing within their community that they didn't like. Now, the development community, business community felt like that would slow, that was an impediment in the city. So they began to sow those seeds and began to fund efforts to begin to get the idea of that moving in the right direction, and they were successful at doing it. Now, for the average voter, you, me, all of us, right? The power of our vote has just been cut in half. I mean, that's just the reality of it. If, you know, in terms of unelecting or electing an alderperson, your vote now has 50% less power than it did before. That's just mathematically what it is. So people who are saying that it impacts the African-American vote, that may be what they're talking about, but that impacts everyone. When you look at Prop D, the way that impacted African Americans in a negative fashion is that, you know, because of the way voters voted, right? They, what in that article that was written by, I think, Antonio French, he laid out, you know, how people voted strategically and how North St. Louis, they could just stay home now because they would not have an impact on the election like they would prior to Prop D passing. And you'd have to read that article because your president will cut me off here in a minute.
He saw me on mute and decided now was perhaps the time.
But hopefully that answered it for you, Reginald. Thanks for the question.
Vaughn has another question from the comments for us.
Yes, sir. This question reads, one second, gotta scroll up. If older people must rescue themselves, then why are they drawing their own ward maps? Why not rescue themselves as a group for a nonpartisan and public committee?
Talking about the issue of the need to recuse oneself, and it wasn't directly addressed to one candidate or another. So, or one panelist or another, I suppose. So President Reed, if you want to go first, and then Dr. Farrell, and then Amelia, I see you have your hand up, so we're coming.
I've been talking a lot. I'll let Dr. Farrell go first, and I'll follow up.
I think that the whole principle of recusing yourself, which by the way is not required, you do have to reveal conflicts of interest, but you don't have to recuse yourself from voting on a particular issue. That's really important. And it's a very good point, because the people who have something to gain or lose, who have a conflict of interest, including in drawing their own maps, choosing who their voters are, ought not to do that. And that is conflict of interest across the board. You're absolutely right. We believe that you ought not to vote in your official capacity or use your influence in which there is a personal or financial conflict of interest. We also believe that there's a great conflict of interest in having you vote, you draw your own wards. And that is an important principle that public commissions, citizens commissions, which are starting to spring up across the country, are built on.
President Reed.
So I invite everybody that all people who are watching this tonight, just look it up. So what they're finding across the country is that the citizens commissions aren't coming up with any better maps. They aren't coming up with any better decisions, or any of the process isn't smoother or anything. You look in just some of the places across the state of Missouri, some of those are landing in court, so judges are ultimately drawing them, so on and so forth. This map was drawn by the residents of the city of St. Louis and the neighborhoods and the people who came and spoke. A lot of people could probably point to directly within that map changes that they influenced by their input from the community. It was drawn by the community. When you look at Prop R, you talk about keeping the aldermen out of it, but then within Prop R, the aldermen would choose the commission members. So if we're choosing the commission members, couldn't we ultimately make sure our friends were part of the commission, part of the people that sent in the application, and then vote on our friends to be the commission members and cut a deal that way, if that was the fact, So Prop R isn't that silver bullet that would bring on this major needed sea change, right? But one thing that does is the community letting their voice be heard, the community taking those opportunities to weigh in on those things, and continuing to hold the elected officials accountable. Thank you.
Speaking of the community weighing in on things, Amelia, you've had your hand up for a long time. Thank you for being so patient. Asking to unmute. There we go.
Hi, no worries. I'm totally fine waiting. First, I'll say in the spirit of all the conflict of interest, I was an organizer with Prop R this summer. So putting that out there. But I wanted to direct a question just to Kathleen. For folks that are supportive of Prop R and want to see this passed in the next election, what is the way for folks to sort of get involved at this process, get involved with getting the word out there, sort of where are things sort of standing at the moment with Reform STL and doing sort of the voter outreach that needs to be done for folks that are supportive?
Well, the first thing that you can do is to go to our website and sign up to be a volunteer. If you really want to jump in, Amelia, we are having a spokesperson training this Saturday from 3:30 to 5, because we have a list of about 17 or 18 neighborhood associations and community groups who want a presentation of the Prop R. Okay. And, COVID makes things very, very different, but we have an awful lot of work to do to educate the community. I know, because I was part of Prop D as well, but not everybody, joined the Reform St. Louis Coalition, but I was part of both, that the League of Women Voters, reached thousands of voters with information, and our other partners did as well. And I think we did a good job of educating the community. And it's very interesting that the polling that was done after the election of last spring, March and April, most people were very satisfied because they thought there was less vote splitting. They thought there was, as a matter of fact, we elected an African-American woman mayor. And I think that's quite important, where people could really say, look, in the first round, I really like these candidates. I support what they stand for. And then you take the two top candidates and have a runoff election in April. And I think that was a good process. And the polling showed us that people were satisfied with that process. Again, if we want to change it, we need to go back to a vote for the people. Part of Prop R would make sure that we had to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Farrell. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. And Millie, I saw your hand go up. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, feel free to ask.
No, I apologize. I must have pressed that in air because I'm listening intently, learning from all of this going on, and I don't have a question at this time. So I do apologize for.
Oh, no, it's absolutely fine. No worries whatsoever. Glad to have you here, Millie.
No, thank you for welcoming me, and nice to meet everybody.
All right. Before we move on to kind of our outro section, we did have a couple of questions directly from the board that we wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to ask. And the first one has to do less with the future of the redistricting process and kind of what the vision for the city looks like moving forward, and more about like the logistical realities of how ward reduction is going to impact people in the city. And that question is, President Reed, what is the projected impact on things like city services and the way in which those are going to be administered and delivered under a 14-ward system as opposed to a 28-ward one?
Well, part of what we are going to be doing across this next session of the Board of Aldermen is working on the staffing table to see what type of resources each ward will need or each alderperson will need to carry out their duties. Chris, as you know, all of those every one of the departments report up under the mayor's office. But the Board of Aldermen, we not often get tagged with, everything from street cleaning to, trash removal and everything else, high grass and everything, when the departments aren't moving on it. And then we use our bully pulpit to try to get those departments moving on. But part of what we will be looking at when we look at, reallocation of resources is maybe having someone within that aldermanic office, along with handling constituent service requests, also have a person that can work on, planning and development issues and working with the community on future planning and development issues, some of those types of things. So all of those things are part of the next phase of the process that we're putting in place. And you will see a draft board bill put in place eventually once we have it we have general ideas based on what we see in other cities. And then it'll be a whole array of public discussions, just like we did on the redistricting process. And hopefully all of you all will weigh in and give us your ideas also.
That is actually directly related to our next question. So fantastic job of creating a segue. So one of the things that we heard consistently from our membership on other media who were kind of reaching out to us and asking questions about tonight's meeting really did hone in on the fact that community input with regards to the ward reduction process, in many people's opinions, started too late. I know that they're aware of the fact that the census data was part of the reason that that decision was made, but is there looking back at the process and kind of assessing what to do moving forward when it comes to these kinds of large decisions that will have a large impact on our city as a community. Do you think that the rationale behind waiting for census data was a strong one? Is that something that in the future we should, as a city, look to engage with the public sooner when it comes to those kinds of decisions to give ourselves a longer runway? Just kind of wanted to get your take with regards to the way that that process went and how it can be done better next time.
Well, when you look at what we did in comparison to other cities across the country, we had by the end of our public engagement process, nobody showed up and nobody wanted to speak, and nobody, I mean, literally, I think, the last meeting we had where we asked for public input and stuff, and we sat around, I think one person may have showed up to speak, right? So we pretty well had exhausted the public by then. I went out to neighborhood meetings, everyone that requested me to. I went out and talked to them with the maps and took information in, and then we took that back. We had the portal open where we took in hundreds of comments and stuff through the portal. And for people who say, well, you could have started 2 years earlier, look, one of the things that we could open ourselves up to in that case is a future of a lawsuit. I can understand some people who may not want us to be successful to really push that idea, because had we started 2 years earlier and laid out, okay, this ward, we should consider this with this ward and so on and so forth, without even having the numbers that are required by law for us to follow, that would create a big, huge gray area in terms of being able to be challenged on the legality of a map, because it's not just ultimately the decisions you make, but it's also the process you took to get to those decisions, right? So you have to really handle these things in a way where they are open, transparent, but also that meet all the legal requirements and also protect the city, along the way in the residents. So, I think we took in a lot of information. We would have, and fact of the matter is, that nobody else was showing up to speak. It wasn't like we had a whole backlog of comments still waiting to be heard from. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that perspective. Thank you both, President Reed, Dr. Farrell, for your presentations and for taking the time to come and speak with the membership tonight. We sincerely appreciate you being open to questions from our membership and for answering them and providing us with the information that you have. Speaking of information, in the chat, I'm going to drop links to both the city's redistricting website if anyone wants to go and learn more about the process, the factors that have gone into it, what the process is generally speaking. Additionally, reformstlouis.com, dropping a link there for anyone who wants to learn more about Prop R. I saw some folks who are looking to get actively engaged with the trainings that are up and coming. If you want to put your email in the chat for Kathleen to get in touch with you so that she can give you more information about those trainings, please feel free to do so now. And last but not least, for our folks in the audience who are interested in becoming a member of the St. Louis Young Democrats, but may not yet be a member of the St. Louis Young Democrats, as I indicated previously, folks from our wonderful, wonderful membership engagement team will be reaching out by email. So check for an email to come from us. Folks who go to pay membership dues to the St. Louis Young Democrats who are not yet members, using the email that they use to register for this event, will receive $10 off of their membership dues. How very exciting is that? I sound like I'm an infomercial, but really, no, we're just excited to get as many people involved in what we're doing this upcoming year as we possibly can. We'll be reaching out by email with information about our next monthly meeting, as well as opportunities to get involved with us in the community, going out and doing some volunteer activities in the near future. While the surge in Omicron is making that a little bit more difficult than it might have been otherwise, we are committed to finding ways for all of our members to make positive impacts on our city. So I really appreciate everyone being here. Thank you for joining us for our first meeting of the year. All things considered, I think it went okay. And I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your evening.
Thank you all.